right. Very lucky to have the great Ben Shear. Very well
Wow.
respected, very well known. I was not surprised by how many people liked the coming soon posts, and thank you for sharing that on your page, or collaborating, I guess is the technical term. But a lot of response on that. So very excited to sit down and talk to you. I think it'll be a very big learning experience for myself as well as a lot of people.
Well, I appreciate you having me on. Always happy to kind of share a little bit about what I do and not just what I do, I guess my philosophies and thinking on golf fitness. I've been doing this a very long time.
Just to go back, I don't want to go too far. Most people who have heard of you and know you, and you're very well known, know most of your history. What was the compelling moment? There was obviously an interest in physical fitness and training, but what was a compelling moment that decided, or you made the decision to go all in?
Well, what's interesting about golf, and for me, is like I didn't grow up being a golfer. Like I played some golf for fun. It wasn't like it was one of my primary things I did. And I was training all types of athletes. And what I quickly learned living in New Jersey was, wow, there's not that many professional athletes to make a living doing this. I had a couple of guys, and then they're in season a big chunk of the year, so they were only around a little. I was like, okay, well, I'll work with college guys, right? It's like, well, guess what? College guys only around in the summer. It's like, okay, let me trickle down. What's next? Like, oh, I'm going to go to high school guys. It's like, well, they're in school until 3 o'clock every day, guys, girls, whatever, right? Like they're in school until 3 o'clock. So now you're like, I got a business that's from 3 to 9. It's like, well, if this is really what I want to do with my life and be able to support a family and do all the things that I want to be able to do, this doesn't really work. So who else can I pick up who kind of are not just looking for fat loss or whatever the case may be, people who really had a training goal, had a passion for what they were doing, kind of had a sporting or functional kind of thing. And it was like, well, I think the country club sports, golf, tennis, those types of things are probably a good place to start because, now I'm busy in the afternoon with the kids and all that stuff, but it's like, and some of the pro guys and college guys in the summer. But the reality is, how do I fill up my mornings and make money the other part of the day? And so I kind of stepped in that direction. And I had a couple clients who were golfers already, and they were like, oh, you should talk to our country club pro. You should talk to this person. So I kind of started going down that rabbit hole, and I found that, wow, golfers are pretty passionate people about their golf, right? Like, they might not be the most fit, or they could be a 20 handicapper, a 12 handicapper, a 5 handicapper, but man, they love this game and they have a real passion to get better and do it. So I really enjoyed that aspect of them. And, being the science-minded guy I am, I started looking for research and who was doing research in golf, biomechanics and ground forces and just you name it, everything related to it. And, I don't want to say how old I am, but I'm pretty old. So, I started doing this stuff in 1993 for golf. Started with my first tour player in 1998. So back then, when people were doing research, there was no internet. That wasn't a thing.
Mm-hmm.
There was none of that stuff. So it was like people would do research and it would go in a journal. And I would read their journal, and then I would pick up the phone and call them and say, hey, I read your thing about golf, blah, 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 blah. I'd love to chat with you. And what you quickly learned is researchers who got no attention back then, now a lot of people, obviously, with the internet and stuff, they know who a Sasha McKenzie is or a Mike Duffy is or a Dr. Scott Lynn or these other, awesome guys who are doing great work. But back then, it was just some guy sitting in the lab, and they had no way of dealing with the real world. So when you gave them a call and say, hey, I'm interested in this from an actual practical standpoint, I want to see how I can take what you're studying and then create training programs to change those things, modify those things, improve those things, whatever. Couldn't be more excited to have a conversation with somebody who actually had interest in their work that was basically in some journal that no one even knew existed, other than very few people who were searching it. So I quickly found myself in a really small group of the smartest guys in the world doing research in golf. And I was doing stuff, and then I was like training people. And then I would go back and say, hey, can we retest my guys and do this and do that? And we were seeing all these changes we were able to make. And it kind of just took off from there. But really, to be honest, like I said, I wasn't a golf guy to start. It was more of a business decision than anything else. And what you quickly learn is, man, golf's a pretty good fitness business to be in.
There's a lot of injuries, but a lot of people who, like you said, are very passionate. Golfers tend to, I would have to imagine this is a demographic that gravitates to golf because it's not a cheap sport to play. So you have to have some sort of success at some level to be able to afford to play it. Even I'm not talking about if you remember, well, you're in Jersey at a Baltusrol or somewhere in the New York Mets section at Winged Foot or something like that. I'm not talking at that level, but just a set of clubs is $700. So you'd have to think that if somebody in their life has the fortitude to get to a level where they could afford a novel or a hobby where it's costing $700 just for the equipment, not even to get into the clothing section, but then it's going to cost them $50 to $100 around on the weekend or during the week, then they're going to have the passion to reach out to say, hey, I want to get better. Where do I think I'm lacking, and who do I need to go to?
Yeah, and look, obviously there's the two big things, right? The two big things I think on the fitness side are people are either playing in pain, back pain, shoulder pain, neck pain, elbow pain, whatever the case may be, wrist pain, you name it, or they want to hit it farther or actually see both, right? Everybody wants to hit it farther. That's number one.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of people are dealing with, oh, I can't even play 2 days in a row because my back is so jacked up or whatever the case may be. That was really like the big two buckets that you kind of went into this with, is this kind of, I don't want to call it rehabs. It's not like rehab where you're sitting there and doing, that kind of stuff. But, looking at mobility or stability, looking at some basic motor controls, looking at some just core controls, you name it, movement skill, let's call it, coordination of it, right? Because a lot of people, they move poorly. I mean, now obviously the golf professionals, due to TPI and other things that are out there, are starting to appreciate the body piece of the swing. But back then, I mean, golfers, the teachers are just like, turn more, get behind the ball, get your hands here, do this. And, you got a bunch of guys who are 55 years old, been sitting behind a desk doing nothing for 30 years. And it was literally killing them. I mean, it was literally breaking these people down. And so that's a big part of where the opportunity came, is educating the golf professionals that were involved with these people and being able to reach out and have a conversation with them and say, hey, I'm working with, so-and-so, and, I know you're trying to get him to do these things, but he can't do that. And, you got to give me 6 weeks, you got to give me whatever, or, hey, maybe here's a way to think about modifying his swing that would put a little bit less stress on his back, because, the guy's spending all this money joining the country club or whatever it is. And he could, here, obviously we have a semi-short season. We don't have golf all year long in New Jersey, right? So some guy pays a membership, he's pays some big initiation thing. He's got a lot of money into this deal. And now he's like, I could play once a week. That's it. Or my back's going to blow out. And they don't feel like they're getting a return on that investment. So, I became a big resource for people to help them actually forget about performance. Just get out and play and enjoy the game. And I still think that's a huge piece of this golf fitness space, that's going on. People want to enjoy it, play pain-free golf, and just get out there and, be out in the sunshine, be in a beautiful place, spend times with friends and family, get to do all of that stuff. And, that's what's so awesome about golf.
Yeah, very much so. One thing I want to get into with you, because you're good friends and colleagues with Dr. Stu McGill, and going through working with one of his people, Brian Carroll, who I've also had on the show, but going through the assessment that they have, and 3 hours of assessment, and listening to, because Dr. Stu's been on some pretty big podcasts lately, Huberman Lab, Peter Attia, The Drive.
He was on my podcast. Come on, even though I only did like 10 and then stopped doing it, but he did come on mine.
I think you do a great job. I think you need to restart, but I know time is very valuable.
Yeah, I know. Somebody was on me recently about kind of restarting. I am thinking about redoing it.
At least it'll clear a bunch of information out of your head and make room for some new stuff. So, yeah, I'm on the voting side that says you need to restart that again.
Yeah.
But as far as Dr. Stu's assessment, extremely thorough, and I had not experienced that. I've experienced some thorough assessments through the banged up body I have over the years of trying to play pro golf, but was very impressed with theirs, not only from the personal standpoint to see your history and what you want to do to figure out how the sort of the map, but also what's physically wrong, but also in listening to him on some of these other shows through their assessment, it's like, well, you're going to be able to do certain things based off what your injury has caused, and you're not going to be able to do other things. So I guess one question I have to you, because you're obviously at extremely high level, is one, and you're never supposed to ask two questions, I guess, at once, but one, what would be your process for assessment? And then two, how would you go about understanding if someone has a limitation, about not unraveling that completely, because let's say they're tight, and if you loosen them up, now the instability just goes haywire. I know that's two very big questions, and we can take them one at a time. So
Yeah.
let's go to the first part.
So let's start
How do
with
you do your
Stu, right?
assessment?
Like what Stu does compared to everybody else in the world.
Yes.
Okay. Like, so Stu does provocative testing.
Mhm.
Most people who end up in Stu's place now up in Canada, right? You're in his basement of his house at this point, right? Which is, he's got a whole little thing set up down there. It's pretty cool. Up in the woods in this beautiful kind of cottage country in Canada, north of Toronto. You know, he's doing a provocative testing. So he's literally like putting you in positions and crunching down on you. And he's like looking for you to go, oh yeah, that really hurt bad, right? I'm not doing that, right? I'm not looking to do provocative testing that actually elicits a pain response. Not many people actually do. Stu is kind of the one. I mean, I've gone up there with tour players myself. I literally, on my phone, I have the entire 3 hours recorded because it was so fascinating to do it, and to learn from Stu is obviously incredible. I mean, such a brilliant guy, and probably nobody from a university perspective has studied the spine more than he has. But I would say my assessment is much more movement based, right? So I actually want to know what you can do and what you can't do. You know, there's a lot of types of stuff that I've kind of, I'll call hybridized from different places I've learned, whether it be, you know, what we learned at TPI, what I've learned with other certifications, what we do in my Golf Digest certification. I do some of this red cord type of stuff. I do other thing called a 1080 map, which is a more functional multi-planar type assessment. And so my whole thing is always, when I'm assessing someone, again, and we also have 3D and force plates of swings and all the other, the golf aspect of it. I'm talking about the human aspect of it right now. You know, my whole thing is, I don't like to ever look at just one movement related to something in the body's function, right? So whether it's internal rotation, I can look at it in one way and I might do poorly or I might do badly. So I want to know, oh, if I look at internal rotation coupled with extension, and then internal rotation, I'm talking about of the hip, right? So I'm gonna extend and I'm gonna internally rotate on one of my hips, and then I'm gonna flex while I internally rotate on that hip, and then I'm gonna be in neutral while I internally rotate on that hip. Well, am I bad at all of this? Right? So if I look at flexion, like generally like flexion, extension, and rotation, and side bend, right? So let's call that the big four buckets, right? You can flex, you can extend, you can rotate, you can side bend, right? So I try to look at all four of those in combination with internal and external hip rotation. And what I'm looking for is, man, is there one of these patterns that I fail every time? Like everything with internal rotation is bad. So now I know it's not really necessarily that maybe my extension is the problem. Maybe it's just the hip or it's just the flexion. That what's the thread, right? So when I do multiple testing that have integrated parts, and some of the testing might be isolated and some is integrated, I'm looking for the thread, because usually the thread will show up, and that's the biggest elephant in the room. And oftentimes if you can fix that, you find a lot of things start falling in place, right? Where if I just looked at it in one position and I don't do great there, but what if I tested in other three movements or four movements and it was good in all the others? Well, is it really the internal rotation that's the problem? Or is it maybe the position of it? Maybe it's the rotation. Like, let's just say I do internal hip rotation with trunk rotation. Maybe the real problem was the trunk rotation, not the hip rotation. I mean, obviously we can isolate all of these pieces out and we can go on with this stuff forever. But if I don't do the integrated movement assessment, I never find the threads that run between the things, right? So I do a combination of isolated and integrated and try to find what pattern keeps popping up. Okay, every time I do whatever, this is always bad. Doesn't matter how I couple internal rotation. It's just bad. Okay, well now I got to understand why is that bad, right? So my assessment is a kind of combination of isolated, integrated, and then I also, you know, there's some difference in philosophy on some of this stuff where like, and not that there's a right or wrong answer, just my experience, right? So I'm not going to say I'm right and somebody else is wrong. But for example, some type of assessments, FMS, TPI, whatever, like they don't want you to coach the person at all. They just want you to see what they do, right? Just show me what you do naturally. And then if you fail, they say you failed. Where I will do that to start. But if they fail, I want to know, can I coach them through it? Because if I can coach them through it, why am I going to spend time fixing it in the gym? It was a lack of understanding of the movement or how to do the movement that was the problem. It's not a true physiologic limitation in what they're doing, right? So we got to be careful. And then even the words you use. I mean, there's really good examples of guys who have done some testing with, I won't skip the example, but one of these types of certifications. And they have a whole way that everyone should cue the actual exercises, right? The assessments. And so you do this, and then you do that, and then you do this, and there's words that how you want you to describe it to the person who's going to do it. Well, I have friends who are motor learning experts who took those same exact tests and use different words that they believe are the right words from a motor learning perspective and get totally different outcomes.
Mm.
Whether you're using internal cueing, external cueing, all of these types of things. So if you followed it the exact way the certification tells you, people are going to fail a lot more stuff than if you use the motor learning guy's words.
Yeah, that's where I seem to have not deep issue with some in very, because I see this across industries, and that was the genesis of that question. I see it in coaching. I see it as I watch the fitness and training industry, diet industry. Those people are fanatical. They're almost psychotic when they get in their debates. I mean, I read some of these things online. It's like, wow.
But we know that if, people have done studies on studies of nutrition, and what we know is it is the worst science in the world.
Mm-hmm.
The science is beyond horrible. There's so much bio-individuality from person to person. There's a lot of different stuff, but we certainly know. If just in my lifetime, the amount of things that have changed from a research perspective, don't eat fats, eat carbs, don't have sugar, and have sugar, have salt, don't have salt, only if it's sea salt, it's a Himalayan salt, it's Celtic salt. It's like, oh my God. And no matter how much people have their feet dug in with their position today, in 10 years from now, we're going to have our feet dug into a different, kind of position about, the vegans will show you and vegetarians will show you 8,000 studies that support what they say. And then the carnivore diet guy is going to give you studies that support what he says. And they couldn't be on further opposite ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the keto guy and and you know what? All of this stuff works for some percentage of the population.
Yes.
Right. And part of good training, part of good coaching, part of good nutrition, part of good therapy is finding people who find what works for you. Right. All of this stuff is individual. Are there general overriding principles from training and all that stuff that are probably good? Yes, of course there are. But there are also very specific things that are related to each of us as a human that we have to address from an individual perspective and cannot take this overly general approach.
And that therein lies the reason I wanted, because at your level and the success you had and the people you work with, I thought that it would be, and the issue I have with some people who say, well, I studied under this methodology and then I went and I did this methodology and it has to be like this. I say, well, no, it doesn't. But you're talking about individualistic. And as you said, I would have to assume it was Dr. Wu that might have tweaked the words and done different, because he's been on. He was one of the guests actually that said I'd reach out to you as well.
So Will was the one who did it. Yep. So
very good guy. Very
smart guy. And again, are the words he used the exact right words? I don't know, right? I mean, I just know that we're getting different outcomes of movement patterns based on words. Mm-hmm. That's pretty important. Yes. That's a pretty important piece to this, right? And I think, the thing you're saying about people who say, I'm a TPI guy, I'm a Paul Check guy, I'm a Charles Poliquin guy, I'm an ART guy, I'm an MAT guy, I'm a this guy, a that guy. I think, and I've said this on other podcasts in the past, one of the dangers we have, and maybe danger is the wrong word, but is that as humans, we all seek belonging. We want to be part of group. We want to be, because this is a golf podcast, I'll use TPI as the example, right? But you want to go to a TPI conference and Dave and Greg be happy to see you and be like, hey, Ben, great to see you, and give you a big hug, and you feel like you're part of the community, and that's what we want. So I've paid them my money, I've taken the classes, they like me, I like them, we're all friends. That feels good. It makes me feel good as a person. So what I do is I start, becoming friends and going to their conferences, right? I become friends with all of their people on Facebook and Instagram. And everybody's saying the same thing because that's what TPI teaches. Mm-hmm. And every day, all I'm doing is getting reinforced what a genius I am. Right? Oh, look, see, I'm right. He's doing the same thing as me. I'm right. I'm right. I'm right. I'm right. And I always tell people, look, I take lots of classes in lots of different people. I wouldn't call myself an anything person. I've done MAT with Greg Rotzkos. I've done TPI. I mean, I've done tons of different stuff. I mean, even today, nowadays online, I'm taking different isometric classes and fascial classes and you name it every day. I don't ever like to be part of any one group. And maybe, and it's not because I don't want to feel a sense of belonging, but I think that's the death of us. And from a learning perspective, what I tell people as a young coach, say, look, if you're a level 3 TPI and power and this and that, and you have all of this knowledge, you've learned, let's call it 90% of what they're teaching for now. How about you now unfriend all of those people, stop following all of those people, don't go to any of those conferences, and say, who has the exact opposite viewpoint or something significantly different, but who also has success, right? Because Paul Chek had success. Charles Poliquin had success. TPI has success, right? There's all of these people have had success in what they do. Gary Gray with his 3-dimensional functional stuff. Stu McGill, right? We could go down these lists. Mike Boyle, this person, that doesn't matter, right? These people, find people who have had success. Take the people who you've already learned as much as you can from them. Stop being overly focused on that and say, hey, what else can I learn, right? What else can I add to my toolbox? And stop believing that the one thing or that you put your money in, that's the end all be all, right? We came out with a Golf Digest fitness certification in the last year that I am one of the main teachers for. Will actually teaches a motor learning section and cueing and all that stuff because, they talk a lot about that from a golf perspective, but they don't talk about it from a fitness perspective. It's not the same how you do it. It's different in fitness than it is in golf instruction, right? But part of what I did is people are like, oh, well, I'm already TPI certified. I said, look, I didn't build the program to be competition to TPI. Look, I was the first guy that did level 1, level 2, level 3. I mean, I've done them all. I got junior certificate. I mean, I did it all, right? Like, I'm not bashing what they're doing. I love what they're doing. But I've been doing this for a really long time. And I probably, in the world, there's probably nobody else who's trained more combination of tour players, juniors, and regular business people, right? Because a lot of the guys who work with tour players, that's all they do. A lot of people who work in a regular gym, they just work with regular people. They don't have tour players to work with, right? Or somebody they specialize in working with kids. I ran a huge juniors academy for more than a decade in my gym. I've been working with businessmen, executives for 30 plus years, and I've been working on tour since 1998. Right. So I've got a pretty good, and they're not all the same. And I don't train my businessmen and juniors the way I train my tour players. Right. So you learn different things from each of those populations. Right. And it's great to look at tour models. This is what the best players in the world are doing. But that doesn't mean that all of that applies to some dude who sits behind a desk for 30 years. Right. Let's remember that tour players are outliers. Right. Like, most of them obviously are genetically pretty gifted from God, gave them, hey, you're special, right? You have the it, whatever that it is, right? You have this thing. And then most of them have never sat behind a desk for a week in their life, never mind 30 years in their lives, right? 30 years straight. Most of them are traveling with trainers, physios, chiropractors, so you got more talent. You've never sat behind a desk. You've never done any of these things. You have the smartest people traveling the world with you, taking care of you every single day. And then oftentimes we try to take some guy who's been sitting behind his desk for 30 years. And, when I was younger, I played football and I have a hip problem and a knee problem. I was a baseball pitcher, my shoulder's all jacked up. And, I've been sitting behind a desk. I'm kind of overweight. I haven't been taking care of myself. But man, I love golf. I want to be really good. It's like, well, what a tour player does probably has nothing to do with you, right? So the Golf Digest certification was meant to be complementary to what they were doing, not competition to what they're doing, because there's a lot of great value in both. And I think if you're working with both populations, or ours is much more driven around, their model is much more, this is what the best players in the world do, and we should address these things related to that, where ours is much more about, hey, you're going to see a 50-something-year-old guy who basically hasn't done anything. If you look at health club, gym, personal training statistics over the year, the average person who comes to see a trainer works out twice a week. And then, by the way, I got family vacation this week. I got a member guest. I got a little whatever I'm playing in. I got this too much work this week. I'm not going to make it. And you look back at the end of the year and you saw that guy on average 1.5 times a week. How do I help that guy? I don't care what Rory McIlroy is doing for that guy, right?
No.
He's old, broken down, sitting behind a desk, and you got him 1.5 out. You got him 1.5 times per week. It's a little bit of a different philosophy in how you do it. So that whole our certification is much more about how do you take a practical approach to help that guy the best he can from a swing and a body perspective and match those things up. Because you know what? If a guy's got massive kyphotic posture and he's had it for 30 years because he sits at a computer all day and on his phone and in his car and all that stuff, if you think in 1.5 hours a week, you're going to make that guy have good posture and increase his range of motion massively. I mean, can you make some change? Of course you can make some change. But are you going to like make this guy like stand up straight and have this big turn and all that stuff? I mean, if that's the only thing you're doing for the 1.5 times per week, but you're going to want to do some other strength work. You may have some mobility, you may have some stability, posture, and that stuff might be part of it. It's like how much time you really have to dedicate to that component, right? Realistically, if you're doing 1.5 times 20 minutes a week, you think that you're turning this person into, Adam Scott's posture? No chance, right? So it's like, well, how do I help him the best way I can? So, I've always looked at it through, I don't need to be part of any group and like that, the hug part from people. I want to be respected for what I do, but I don't need to be part of it. My obligation is to my players and my clients. How do I do the very best job I can for them? And I think that's by doing what I just said. Go out, learn from other people, question everything that you're currently doing, find other people who have different philosophies that do it different ways, ask different questions, right? And there's no everything that they all just become tools in your toolbox. And when do I apply my TPI stuff? When do I apply my Golf Digest stuff? When do I apply my FMS or my MAT or my Stu McGill or my Charles Paulchek or Charles Poliquin or blah, 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 NAS? We could go on with those lists of things forever, right? When do I apply what? As opposed to saying, I'm this guy and putting yourself in a bucket. I mean, and I often get people who come to me and they work with somebody who's a single-minded certification or philosophy person. And they're like, well, I've been going to see this person. I spent all this money and I'm not really getting, I got better a little bit in the beginning and I quickly leveled off and I'm not getting it better anymore. It's like, well, because that model doesn't account for these fascial things or, whatever the case may be, right? Joint mobilizations or true power development, speed development. How are you doing that? Why should you do it? When do you do it? Right? There's a lot of stuff that's out there that are good things, right? Meaning, say, it's easy to say, lift heavy, run fast, throw something hard, swing fast, right? Okay, yes, we understand what, and I'll use Will's terms here, right? Like those might be the ingredients, right? I got to do something fast. I got to do something heavy. I got to right? We can go, those are the ingredients, but that's not a recipe, right? And
Exactly.
right, we're trying to create the right recipe for each person. And I love that analogy, the way Will talks about it, because it's like, I think a lot of people in training have good ingredients. I think very few have good recipes.
Yeah. I think when Will was on, we talked about that because, of course, everybody's grandmother made the best apple pie, right? And people, I would say that about my grandmother as well, and many people did because they would bombard her with requests, and I'll give you $50 for your pie, etc., just to paint a picture. But I would sit there as a young kid and watch her as she would bake this. So everybody uses apples, flour, sugar, brown sugar, or cinnamon to some extent. Make their dough, put it in the oven, etc. Okay. She would sit there, never used measuring anything. Handful in, knead it out. Nope. Pinch more. Not quite. Okay, little. Okay, now I got it. So yeah, to your point that it's not the ingredients, but the ingredients are not the recipe. You could
Right.
have the right ingredients, but if you don't know how to put it in, you don't know how to adjust for humidity or temperature as far as when you're doing the baking and
How much, what order,
yes,
right? I mean, do I mix my
it
wet and dry together? Or do I separate my wet and dry ingredients and then I bring them together? Like all of that stuff. That in training, I think that is where most people really still don't do a very good job.
why is that? Because if you look back now, I know it would be in Olympic style lifting or power lifting type movement, but if all the training and the research that has been going back to the 50s and the 60s with the Russians, going
Mhm.
back to the 100 years ago with the Bulgarians, that they have all these training logs and all this research and all this everything. Is it that it's not those things aren't adaptable as much to a sport like a golf or hockey or NBA, and that
Like,
it
I
has
mean,
to be
I train.
modified.
The other thing I train besides golfer is hockey players, right? That's
Hmm.
what I do. Home in New Jersey in the summer, I train, NHL and AHL and some D1 hockey players, and the rest of the year I live in Florida and work with golfers, right? So some of the Russian, whether it be conjugated models or different models that are out there, I mean, there's lots of great books and research on that stuff, right? First of all, the 55-year-old guy who's been sitting behind the desk for 30 years
He's not doing
probably
this
shouldn't be
stuff.
doing too much of that, at least not initially, let's say, right? Like,
He's not doing a German volume training
right.
set after work.
How much of that research was done on guys on steroids, taking performance enhancement drugs? So was it the training, or was it the, or not that it wasn't the training, but how much was the training, should I say, right? I mean, you look at like Bondarchuk's type of work. He's a guy who trains hammer throwers, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you look at Bondarchuk, where, he originally came from, he created all these gold medal guys, and then he moves to Canada, who stunk in hammer throwing, and all of a sudden, Canada's now the best hammer throwers in the world. You go, okay, well, maybe there's something to what this guy has to say,
Yeah.
because he went from over here with these athletes, totally left, went over here with these athletes, and was able to duplicate it right away, right? And he's got different models. Like, there's people say there's no such thing as golfish. Well, if you look at Bondarchuk's model, he has a very general model out here, and then it gets more specific and more specific as you get closer to competition, right? So he's got those type of models. So the reality is, golfers on tour, let's start with, right? On tour, we don't have an off season the way they do.
Mm-mm.
Right? We're playing, basically 40 plus weeks a year. They're not playing themselves. They might play 25 to 28 events or something, but there are events 40 plus weeks per year. And some of the off weeks is Christmas and New Year, so they're not going to be crushing it in the gym. They're, taking little breaks to spend time with their family and do all the things that any normal human being should be able to do. So to create truly like linear periodization models or nonlinear periodization models, whatever periodization models, is literally impossible with a tour player. So you're more looking for windows of opportunity. Okay, we're going to be on the road for 4 weeks. Then I got 2 weeks off. Then I'm on the road 3 weeks, and I have 3 weeks off. Then I have 6 weeks in a row. Like, you basically, with all my players, I try to lay out the schedule a year in advance and say, where are my windows, right? Not that we're not training on the road, we are, but we're not going to do enough to make massive physiologic change, right? We're trying to kind of maintain and maybe make small progress, obviously on the road, but we're not going to
They're
have.
not losing any.
Yeah, and I think you
Or
can make
losing
small
minimal.
gains if you do it right, but you're not going to make massive gains because just the amount of work being done is just not high enough. And I got a pro-am, I got to get up at 4:30 in the morning for my tee time. I got like all the stuff, the reality of the tour, right?
And the mental energy that goes into a tournament, I don't think most people understand that. I mean, you were spent by Sunday night.
Oh, dead.
Yeah,
absolutely dead. So I think some of these models that are come from Russia, Bulgaria, wherever, are really hard to implement at a high level in professional golf in today's world. In the old days, I mean, I've been doing this long enough. We used to end at Tour Champs. Fall series was literally just for guys to keep their card, and we would shut it down beginning of September and not play golf until January.
right.
You had a 12-week block where you could do some real structured work. Well, now, what happened is when they first created the fall series and it was no longer kind of an independent thing, a lot of the top guys were like, oh, I don't need to play in that stuff. I'll just start in January. But as the FedEx Cup kicked in, if people remember back, like Jimmy Walker would win 2 events in the fall. He'd be like one of the only top guys to go play. And all of a sudden he would be way ahead in the FedEx Cup. And then guys were like, oh my God, well, I'm not going to play 7 events. I got to go to 2 or 3 of these. I can't let the season get so far away from me without playing. So it just created this dynamic where you didn't get those blocks the way you used to be able to get. And I think, a lot of people, when we have now the amount of injuries we have in golf, obviously a lot of people want to talk about, oh, it's, there are those people who say it's because of everybody lifting weights, which is the dumbest thing ever, right? Because it's like, really? So every other sport in the world, when you get injured, they send you to the gym to get better. Golf's the only sport that the gym is what hurts you? Really? Come on. I'm not saying there's not bad training that can hurt you, but done right, that's a ridiculous approach, right? It's like exercise and fitness is how people get cured from being hurt, not get hurt, right? Unless they're doing the wrong thing. So we're just in this situation. So part of the issue is guys just don't get it to shut it off for 10, 12 weeks. There's no other sport where you can't just shut it down. Right. And I'm not talking about not going to the gym. I'm talking about put your clubs away for a month.
Mm-hmm. Letting the
I mean,
body recover.
I can remember like back in the day with Luke Donald, 2010, 2011 and stuff like that. And I still work with Luke now, 15 years later. But when the season ended, we would take 4 to 6 weeks and put the sticks in the garage and not swing once. The repetitive stress is one of the biggest problems of swinging, and the people who want to argue that exercise is the problem, I tell people all the time, like if you get a biomechanics guy who can show you the amount of force and torsion into the spine and all that stuff of a driver swing,
it's off the charts. It's unbelievable.
It's like getting hit by a car, man.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like people are like, oh, it's the workout. It's like, really? I'm like, if you measure the force that your workout that you're doing X number of times a week compared to the number of swings you take a week, it is like a 1,000 to 1 the forces from the swing to the workout. It's not even close, right? So we have to be realistic with what we're dealing with and how we're doing it. And I think the biggest part that people don't talk about with injuries in golf is there's no off season. That's been like, just shut it down. Don't swing once for 4 to 6 weeks. Man, you'd be shocked at what wonders that will do to your body for a tour player.
It's amazing if you can, because I did that when I was playing for a living. Didn't ever make it as far as I wanted to, but I did notice when in the off season for smaller tour stuff, it was, as you said, by the November, end of October, that's it. You're done. Unless there's some small stuff down in Florida, you're going to go play, and you're really not doing a whole lot until maybe the early spring. But when you do take time off, you don't want to. But it's like, hey, maybe I should try this because the trainer or listen to Ben on his podcast said take time off. You get to that second week, and all of a sudden the anxiety starts to dissipate. You get to the third, fourth, fifth week, and it's like, wow, I actually feel pretty good. I can't believe that I was actually that wound up, mentally, physically, everything. And it's like my body doesn't hurt as much anymore. So
you don't realize it when you're in it, right? Because you're so focused on the task at hand that you get lost. I mean, even like with my hockey guys in summer, I mean, we train like dogs. I mean, the training is super, super intense. Like even for my guys, halfway through the summer, I basically say, okay, next week you take off, which gives them like 9 days, right? Because it's like weekend 5 days plus weekend 9 days. And I'm a big like measure guy, right? So we run sprints with timers. We jumping on machines that are measuring velocities and all kinds of techie stuff, right? And inevitably, by the second or third workout, when they come back after 9 days off, they PR every time, every single time.
Whole body androgen levels go back to where they should.
But the same reason, like they're always panicked, like, oh my God, how am I? This is my only, this is the summer. I have 12 weeks to train or whatever. I can't skip a week. I'm like, oh, you're going to skip a week. And they come back and they're like, oh my God, I feel incredible. It's like you just let everything settle in, all the work you've done, all the training, all the little just niggles that are going on. Let them just calm down. Let the body just kind of take care of itself, right? And it's like, current physical therapy, and I don't mean to bash physical therapy, but if you're going to like a general, like generic physical therapy place, they don't really do anything, right? Like they're basically doing no harm. They're not really doing anything that's challenging you enough to really get strong, to really get stable, right? They're giving you these like little 2-pound weights and you're doing whatever, like, right? And it's like, I tell people all the time, you're really just getting better because your body just has time. Oh, you have 6 weeks of therapy. Well, it's the 6 weeks of doing nothing hard that made you get better. Your body just healed. You probably didn't even need to go to therapy. If you sat on the couch, you would have gotten to the same place. Right? I mean, it's sad, but reality.
Do you think the overall mantra, what's in the ether of society, at least in this country in general, and sports in particular, and we'll use even golf, that the idea that you have to continually train and train and train to get better and better and better all the time without taking breaks has caused part of this?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. And I think that's psychological, usually more than physiologic, right? I mean, guys feel like they can't take it off. But I think part of when you work with a high level player, the one thing like here in New Jersey, the good part was, well, guess what? We're going to have an off season. The winter's going to come and there's going to be no golf, right? So we had it. Well, we were fortunate in certain ways that we actually had breaks. And one of the interesting things, I ran this juniors academy for 10 years. We put like 40 kids into D1 who could only play golf 7 months a year. And people are like, how are you bumping them out? I'm like, because the no golf got them to focus on their physical and got them away from the repetitive stress of golf. And I think they actually improved much faster. Where people in Florida feel like they have to be out hitting balls every single day.
Mm-hmm.
And then fitness is always secondary, right? It's never primary. So for us, we had a 4 or 5 month window where golf was secondary and fitness was primary. And so the body healed, we got stronger, we got faster, we got more stable, all of the good stuff, right, that we can get out of training. So I think there was actually a huge advantage of it. And, I think with tour players and people who live in warm weather clients, you got to almost still think about it like I'm in season and I'm out of season. Or you can call it preseason, in season, out of season, like whatever, right? I mean, we can get into all the nuance of that. But generally speaking, just finding a way for you to look at it, even though you're able to go to golf, you say, hey, look, I'm going to bring my golf volume way down. I'm actually going to take certain weeks where I'm not going to play at all. I'm going to bring my volume down, and I'm going to take my training volume and move it way up. And then when I come back, I'm going to be way better than I was. And you will, if done right, obviously.
Do you think that some of the susceptibility to injury, in particular at the higher levels, let's say Division I and up, to the best players in the world, with the advent of lighter shafts, longer clubs, we already identified that continual training and not time off is playing a major role in that. But the quest for more speed, putting the body into greater and greater demands, as we mentioned, torque on the spine and the joints during a swing that's 120 plus miles an hour. Now some of those guys approaching 130 on a regular basis. Yep. What role do you think that plays in the beating up, we'll say, of the body and the going down that road to injury?
Yeah, look, I mean, obviously the reality of speed in today's game is the reality of it, right? Like we can't deny that hitting it far is kind of critical at this point if you want to have success at the highest level. You can't swing at you can't have 170 ball speed anymore. Like, I think the number now we'd say 180, but I think we're quickly approaching 185 as kind of like hey, that's not necessarily crazy fast, but like that's kind of the baseline, 182, 183. Like we're creeping above 180 even now. So I think it's important. I think to do it and do it properly is a big, again, back to the recipe analogy. Finding the right recipe is really important to that, right? I can't do everything I've always done and just add this super high intensity thing, which creates more intensity and more volume of work. It can't be an add-on. So if I'm going to add something needs to come away, because obviously max velocity swinging is pretty high in intensity, right? And we know that as intensity go up, frequency and volume need to go down. Yes. Right? The body can only handle so much work, right? So now I'm adding in this high intensity thing. So what am I going to take away? Right? What am I going to lift less weights? Am I going to play less? Am I going to hit less balls? Like, how am I bringing my total work volume? And when I say volume, it doesn't have to just be in the gym. That volume includes practice time. That means playing time. That means all of the physical stresses that you have, right? How do you bring that total, we call it the volume, is looking at like frequency, duration, time, load, right? Like we can say, oh, I did 10 sets of this amount of weight, so how much work is that? I did it this many days a week, right? And so you have this kind of volume of work that you look at, let's call it, and you can look at it from a daily value, a weekly value, a monthly value, whatever it is. So most of us who are trying to do it on a high level, we're trying to be somewhere around the point where, we're on the line, we're under the line, but we're trying to get as much good work in as we can without going over the line. So as soon as I throw that in, I now got to give up something else, right? One thing you learn about golf guys is they don't like to give up golf.
That's for sure.
Right? So now you're like, okay, well, now I got to take something out of my gym program. Well, if I don't have proper stability, I don't have proper strength or whatever, high velocity work can hurt me. And I think that's one of the problems where we are seeing people get hurt is A, they're not adjusting the volume properly when they add it in. And B, on the other end, when you're looking at guys who sit behind a desk for 30 years and young kids, I think most of them are starting their speed training way too soon. Their bodies are not actually prepared to swing that hard, that fast, whether it's the older guys who don't have enough range of motion and whipping their body around at high velocity is going to do bad things. Or young kids who, they can find ways to create speed, but don't actually have the strength and stability. They might have the range of motion, but they don't have the stability and the motor control the segmental controls of the spine and pelvis and all that stuff to actually do it safely as well, right? I mean, the amount of lumbar and spinal like hairline fractures we're seeing with young golfers today is off the charts.
Wow.
And I think a lot of that is stemming from some of this high velocity work. And we got to separate, hey, this is how you play great from, are you ready for this type of training? Not just do it because that's what you do, right? I mean, some people may need, like we had kids in our junior program, like, we had kids who were 18 years old who were doing speed work. And we had kids who were 12 and we're like, look, you may not get to doing speed work until you're 14 or 15 years old. Mm-hmm. We might let you run some sprints and do some other type of stuff, which I think is lower risk for them. Run some sprints, maybe do a little bit of plyos or something like that. Even throwing a med ball, because you can't move it so fast, can potentially, for certain people, be much lower intensity.
Is that where you get into the difference between chronological age, biological age, and sporting age?
Yeah, I mean, right. So you can have there are 13-year-olds who are like 18-year-old, and some of them have did gymnastics as kids or other sports that develop some good muscular strength, stability, coordination, and stuff like that. So that kid maybe who grew up doing some gymnastics might be way prepared way sooner, especially if he's got some parents who are bigger. He's an early bloomer, she's an early bloomer, whatever the case may be. That kid might be ready at 13 or 14. And obviously the girls it's going to be sooner because they mature sooner.
Right.
But on the other side, you get some of these kids who come in, they're 13, they look like they're 9. And all their friends who's the same age, who might look like he's 13 or 14, he's doing speed work, and his mom and dad, go to the golf course on, to the AJGA on the weekend or whatever, the New Jersey State Golf Tournament, and Jimmy's hitting at 50 by their kid, and Jimmy's doing speed work, and they're like, oh, well, Johnny needs to be doing speed work too. And it's like, well, Johnny's going to snap in half if we do speed. I hear you, but we actually have to
take your time.
We got to actually get ready to do that. And that doesn't happen overnight, unfortunately. So like this desire for speed, I think, is a good thing. But again, the recipe, the volumes, the intensity, the frequencies, all of these things need to really specifically be addressed, as opposed to just throwing them in your program. Oh, I bought super speed or stack or whatever. Okay, great. Well, what else do you do? How much are you practicing? And some of these, especially the youth kids, some of these kids are also playing basketball and soccer and like doing 5 other things, because we all know it's good to do multi-sport.
Right.
Where do we stop and say, okay, time out. We're doing too much. Right. And, or, hey, if you want to start adding more gym and speed work for golf, maybe we need to give up soccer. Right. Or maybe instead of playing on, you love soccer, cool. Maybe you play on the town league for fun, and you practice twice a week and have 1 game a week, versus on the club select team that you're practicing every single night and playing tournaments with 6 games on the weekend. Okay, you love soccer. We believe that the multi-sport has value to you, but you don't have to play everything on the, super high overcommitment level, right? Go surfing is really good for you, man. Like, I mean, there's plenty of things. Go ride a skateboard, right? I mean, there's plenty of cool things you can do. You don't have to pay for a uniform. You don't have to have a coach to be developing biomotor skills.
Yeah, I think that's very well missed in today's society. I had Dr. Greg Haff on, who wrote Periodization and Training with Tudor Bompo. It was a long time. It was when I first started, so I probably was not the best episode if I look back and say I could have done this, and this different, but very interesting to read his book.
I think they did the one together, was the Training the Young Champion.
Yeah, I didn't read that one. I've got the periodization one, but
because Bompa had the one original, and then I think they went together. They had like 3 or 4.
Yeah.
Right? So and he's a super smart guy, right?
Yes.
But I think we have to understand that, like, you don't have to pay for everything. Everything doesn't have to be this structured craziness. And every time I want to add something, what's coming off the list? Look, if your kid's lazy and all he does is golf and he plays twice a week, and you want to add some new stuff in, great, go ahead. The problem is today's kids are so over, scheduled, overbooked, over you name it. They got 3 practices in a day. Then they're trying to go, do this and compete. And the parents wonder why they don't do well. And it's like, because you're burying the kid. And it's now no fun either.
No. I wanted to ask you about squats and deadlifts, because for a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people, they do a lot of good, but for some people, they can be detrimental.
Yep.
Uh, I know Dr. Stews has had his ideas on that, especially for golfers with being pliable versus being rigid, are very well documented. I
Mm-hmm.
had Dr. Richard Geyer on, the famed spinal surgeon. Uh, Obviously, he's looking at it from a different perspective because by the time he sees golfers that have done those
It's too
things,
late.
it's too late. They're already broken almost beyond repair. But outside of somebody that's void of injury or void of structural issue,
Mm-hmm.
if someone comes to you and they do have, well, golfers. Let's take some of your high level players, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'll divide up into high level players and we'll divide it up into Joe Smith or Susie Smith, who's been working, as you said, behind a desk for the last 25 years. Um, where would you put deadlifts, uh, squats, as far as force production in somebody's training program? I know obviously it wouldn't be in the beginning. They don't have the range of motion. All they're going to do is hurt themselves. But let's take the advanced golfer, Division 1 to tour level.
So I personally, not even my hockey players, I don't back squat anyone ever. Zero. I don't see a huge value in compressively loading the spine. I think there's plenty of ways to get my legs strong.
It seems to be many at your level seem to be saying very similar.
Yeah,
But no,
I mean,
but I don't
again, and
see
if
it.
I'm going to do any type of squatting with them, I'm only going to do with a safety squat bar, right? Because I think one of the big problems is most of us don't have enough shoulder external rotation,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, so imagine to hold the bar behind your back, you got to have like 110 degrees minimum of shoulder external rotation. Most people, I mean, there are plenty of tour players who do, but most people do not have that, right? Because normal function is 90 degrees.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with me at 90 degrees. I have like maybe 93, 95. There's nothing wrong with my shoulder. That's how it should function, right? But man, how do I get a bar behind my back? I arch my lumbar spine to get my hands to hold that bar in that position. Now, as I go down and descend, obviously I'm going to create more lumbar curving and more compressive force and jacking up my shoulder at the same time, right? So if I had a safety squat bar, I don't mind it. I don't mind like loading it like that. Like give me a split squat with a safety squat bar if you want to put a big load on, right? I'm also a big believer. I'm all about making my guys hold heavy weights. I want to see them lunge, split squat, do all that stuff, holding as heavy dumbbells as they can. Because
For
I
the
feel
hand
like
strength.
hand, forearm, shoulder, by gripping tight, you create this irradiation that works up your arm and into your shoulder and creates shoulder stability. There's so much value in that. Obviously, we know grip and forearm in golf through the rough, the sand, creates speed. I mean, all of that stuff. There's a huge value, just like we have correlations to jump height and all that stuff. There's correlations to grip strength and hand strength, club head speed as well. Right. And certain shots really require it when you're in the deep stuff and stuff like that to control your club face and all,
Right.
all of the things that we deal with. So, but I love a trap bar deadlift. Right. I love a trap bar deadlift. I mean, do I regular deadlift some people who have incredible mobility? Sure. But I think you can teach pretty much anyone to trap bar deadlift safely. I think you can get, unless they have absolutely, baby hands, you can get them to lift a pretty big load, and it's a much safer thing. But again, then I love my split squats, my Bulgarians, my single leg squats, my, walking lunges, forward lunges, backward lunges, side lunging, all of that kind of stuff. Typically, again, I like to do it with heavy dumbbells if I can. I think part of the issue is oftentimes we're trying to get people to do 8 reps, 10 reps, 12 reps, 15 reps. Well, holding heavy weights gets tough to do that. Right? It starts becoming a challenge when you're doing that. Most of the time for my people, I'm trying to get strong. I'm not looking for hypertrophy. I'm looking for strength. So we're probably in the 3 to 5 rep range. So even though they're heavy, they can hang on to them because the amount of time they have to hold them is short. And if they can hold heavy ones, I get a pretty good leg thing. I mean, today we did some like forward and backward combo walking lunging with my hockey guys. And everyone was doing it holding a pair of 36 kg kettlebells. Right? So, I mean, you're holding 150 whatever pounds. It's a lot of weight to lunge with, man.
Yeah,
in your hands. If you're doing full range, getting your knee close to the ground and doing it well, and we kind of talk about like, hey, let's just say I'm doing a forward lunge. Like On the up phase, we want you to come up hard and with speed. We're not just like lunging and slowly coming up from the bottom to get our feet together. It's like, no, on that lead side, I want you to up hard, like come up hard with force and speed, right? And one of the things we don't talk about from a loading perspective, and now we're getting a little bit in the weeds here, but is that the change of direction in the amortization phase of like lunging down to the up, if I'm really focusing on how quickly I transition from that, the braking to reaccelerate, if you put someone on a force plate, right, it's massive. I mean, the amount of force is through the roof, right? Even I'll go back to your back squat analogy. If I took someone, and we've played around with this on force plates, and we said, okay, let's back squat 300 pounds, and someone goes down and they just do a normal squat, and you put the force on the force plate. And then I said, okay, now I want you to go down with 200 pounds, but I want you to put the brakes on hard at the bottom, and I want you to accelerate that thing off the bottom. The force is higher on the 200-pound squat than it is on the 300-pound squat. Right? So this is where you start getting into sports science and some nerdy stuff, but it's like the load is only one measure of what we're doing. Because as I try to change velocity, I increase load. As I try to brake sooner, I increase load. As I try to, all of these things, accelerate faster, forces me to, if I want to accelerate something fast, I better push down a lot harder.
Yes.
Versus just standing back up.
So the like a goblet squat would be more preferential than a back barbell squat.
Yeah, and I occasionally will front squat someone. I feel like that's a little bit easier to do with good technique, right? So I would front squat before it. Again, I love if I want to get a big load and I don't want to worry about grip strength being my issue, I don't mind a safety squat bar split squat.
Is that the yoke bar?
Yeah, about the yokes, the ones that come over like this. Yeah, they come safety squat bars. Yeah, right. So I could do that without an arch. I can actually keep a pretty neutral spine position with that. And I can get a pretty big load, assuming someone doesn't have any back issues or anything like that to load their spine, right? Somebody's relatively healthy. And I could do that in a split squat, which obviously, so I'm going to get a massive load on my leg, but I'm also lifting less weight from a compressive perspective than I would with a bilateral back squat, right? I'm not going to, if I can bilateral back squat 300 pounds, I'm not split squatting 300 pounds, right? So I'm holding less load on my back. So I have less compressive force, right? But I'm not limited by my grip. I'm in a good spinal alignment position, and I can get a serious overload of that leg.
Yeah, so the risk is limited and the reward is increased. Makes total sense.
Yeah, so I'm all about it. Like I said, if you want to do a bilateral leg exercise, do trap bars.
And what would be for the deadlift, the alternative that somebody could do for a deadlift?
Like an RDL type deadlift?
Or if somebody wants to work their posterior chain in a similar fashion.
I don't mind RDLs. I mean, I think you can RDL fine. I mean, I think if I think one of the problems with RDL is typically people feel like they're going to lift up out of that bottom position with their upper body, as opposed to feel like really like your movement is like, most people feel like it's like you lift your upper body, but in reality it's you drive your pelvis towards the bar. I don't want to use the words that I use in coaching, but we say hump the bar, right? So it's like you go down that bottom and your first move is hump the bar, right? And then you understand that it's not initiated from your back. It's a hip-driven motion, right? And if you're driving your pelvis up and forward, your back takes the ride. And I'm not saying your back is not working at all. I mean, people watch these podcasts. Right. Oh, of course your back's kidding. I know. Right. I mean, it's a full posterior chain, to your point, exercise. I'm not getting that. But I mean, I can make it be way more hamstring glute intensive versus low back intensive. Like if I initiate from my upper body, it becomes a big lumbar loaded exercise. I mean, if I'm going to do that, then I might as well be one of these guys who's going to do good mornings or something like that. Right. They're basically doing a good morning with their hands held down. Versus what I would call a true RDL or Romanian deadlift, right? Where you're actually driving your pelvis towards the bar. And I think if you do that, the back gets way out of
it. There's been a lot of chatter, I'll call it, online about thrusting the hips forward. And a lot of, if you look at some of these, I'll call them fringe, not as disrespect, but they're not a TPI. They're not at that level by any means. But a lot of as I watch and read some of their things, it's almost like they try to tear down instead of having a legitimate discussion about why something might be good or why it might not be good. But a lot of their um, chirping, let's call it, is on any sort of deadlift where the hips are thrusting forward. Like, well, if one of the bigger problems in the golf swing is early extension, why would you want the hips to be thrusting, or why would you be doing exercises that thrust the hips forward?
Yeah, look, I mean, there's two things here. One thing is, right, are you trying to address a faulty movement pattern in the golf swing? And is that why you're choosing this exercise?
Mm-hmm.
Or are you choosing this exercise to be, again, so when I look at posterior chain or hamstring work, I kind of break them into two buckets. One is more like the bent knee, slide board curls, hip thrusts, glute bridging, those type of movements. And then you have like your RDL, which is what I'll call like the long hamstring position, right? Like those things are short hamstring.
Long versus short range.
Yeah, long versus short, right? So an RDL is a great short. I mean, there's other exercises you can do as well in the long, but to me, I think you need to train both of those. And I'm not saying every single workout you need to train both, but you need to be cycling them in and out, right? Because the long part, right? Being able to hip hinge is important for golf posture.
Yes.
Right. I mean, part of what we do is we maintain a hip hinged position, right? Do I want to teach someone that the driving the hips forward is how I create speed and power? No. Right. So the student or athlete or player needs to understand why you're doing what you're doing. Right. And some people, they don't early extend. That's not a problem for them. So why can't I train their things like that? Assuming that I still have enough stuff, right? I mean, you can't say one exercise is going to blow someone up. Look, if I got a person who's an early extender, probably not a great exercise for them. But if I got somebody who's not an early extender and we need to get some posterior chain work, probably just fine. Assuming that he's hitting lots of balls every day well without doing it. And that we have plenty of other things in their golf training program that address proper movement patterning. Just getting it strong and having one exercise of all the things you do all week that makes you do that is not going to override the 30 good things you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Again, we talked about volume before. How much volume of what you're doing is that exercise? If it's 1 out of 30 things between practicing, playing, the other things you're doing in the gym, whatever, I'm not over panicked about that. If you tell me I got a guy who's an early extender, well, I'm probably going to want to find a different way to approach that. Right. So, I think you got to look at each situation specifically and not make over generally, blanket statements that this is bad. Bad. Yeah. I mean, you on the tour trailer, how many guys doing RDLs and SLBLs and stuff like that? I mean, Stu teaching, hip airplanes and you name it. I mean, pretty popular, man. Those guys hit it pretty good.
Yeah, they do.
Right. So I'm not going to say you can't do it. Like I said, I think if you got a person who that's their problem in their swing, then it's probably not ideal. But I think if it's not an issue at all, you're going to be fine if it's just one exercise.
When you train somebody at a high level, how do you determine if they're getting to a point where they're getting strong, but it's going to start affecting them? Is there a law of diminishing returns, or you reach a certain point with getting somebody strong where they lose that or start to lose that pliability? Do you keep an eye on that, or is it that you're modifying, let's say, because they're training regularly over a course of years, that every 6 weeks you're modifying their training program because they're adapting so quickly that they're not?
I'm changing their program about every 6 weeks always.
Yes.
Look, I do think there's a point of diminishing return in strength. I think as we learn more and more every year, I think we can blanket statement say, or I will blanket statement say, not all strength coaches will say this, that we've way overvalued strength. And I'm not saying that strength is not important. So that's, people, oh, you said strength's not important. I did not say strength is not important, right? You need to be strong enough, right? But again, you think if I took Akshay Bhatia and we put him in a weightlifting contest, how do you think he's going to do? Hits it pretty far, man.
Yeah.
He hits it pretty far. Plenty of baseball pitchers that you watch on TV look like bean poles that throw at 102 miles an hour, right? Mm-hmm. I think we're starting, at least this is how I do it now. I'm starting to bucket guys as fascial players and muscular players, right? So if I look at Bryson, I look at Brooks, I look at those are muscle players,
Exactly.
right? But if I looked at an Akshay and guys like that, you know, a Joaquin Neiman, you know, Carlos Ortiz, like you can plenty of guys who could hit it 300 plus.
Jamie Sadlowski would probably be the
Jameis
one
Sadlowski, right, is a great example as well. Yeah, like they weren't doing it with muscular force. They would not excel in any test of strength output, right? Bryson might.
Mm-hmm.
And what you learn is there's not one way. There's two different ways. And you train different for muscular players than you do for fascial players, right? They're using this coordinated connectivity fascial system versus kind of just a force-driven system, because we're finding there's way more receptors in the fascia than there is in the muscular system, and it's got its own elastic properties and all of this stuff going on. So, you know, you're not going to treat Akshay the same way you're going to treat Bryson.
No, you ruin them.
You would absolutely ruin them, right? So, you know, and if we took any level of power lifters, let's call the strongest guys in the world, and we said, let's go sprint as fast as we can, jump as high as you can, and swing a golf club as fast as you can, I don't think very many of them would be very fast. I think most of them would be pretty terrible, right? I think they would be pretty terrible, right? So, you know, we're not, you know, it's a golf club. It's not that heavy. I mean, let's not get carried away, right? The golf club's not that heavy.
No.
Does it create a lot of torque and internal torques? Yeah. That can be dangerous and all that stuff? Yes. But the ability to move it fast because of its weight and its mass is not that tricky, right? So we see in every sport, I mean, how many of these basketball players do you see who can jump out of the building? You think they're squatting 500 pounds? No chance. But yet they got a 40-inch vertical. So I think part of it is we're constantly evolving and learning more and more about training. And I think you better be on top of what you're doing and really trying to pay attention because it's evolving fast. And I see some people out there I think are going to be left behind. But it's not as simple as, you know, some of the stuff. And we got to understand that most research in strength and conditioning, you know, came from powerlifting and came from football. We don't have tons of research coming from, you know, how strong is a golfer? You know, how strong is a swimmer? How strong is a baseball pitcher? Right? We're starting to, because now we have the ability to collect data with our exercise equipment. And, you know, just as sports science is evolving, we're starting to get better understanding of some of this stuff. But I don't think we have any definitive answers at the moment. But I think, you know, simplistically, just looking at the things we just talked about, the skinny basketball player, the skinny baseball pitcher, the Akshays, man, you can't deny how far he hits it. You can't deny how fast these guys can throw a ball or how high these guys can jump. And you can't deny that they would be terrible in any true measure of pure strength. So
is there a way that you go about determining which is which, especially at a young age? Well, like, you know, you look at Brooks or you look at Bryson now, and it's like easy to tell that those guys are getting their speed out of force. And you look like at Akshay and some of the other guys that they're getting their speed out of
whippiness.
Whippiness. So, but when I would say if you took them when they were all about 17 to 20 while they're still in school, and they're all hitting it, let's say they're hitting it fairly close to the same distance, if not very the same. It's like, how do you determine that? So if a parent's out there listening and they have a kid that's a good golfer, how can they know that, so they don't take their kid to the trainer in their town and he starts putting them on a
back squatting program.
I want you bench pressing 300 by Christmas. And,
yeah, like I said, I mean, I don't bench press anybody either. Not even my hockey guys. We floor press heavy dumbbells. We don't bench press anything ever. You know, I think what you can do, and again, you need somebody who really knows what they're doing here, is we do different, like what's called load velocity profiling. We can have someone do, and I have, you know, exercise equipment that are connected to like computers and stuff like that. And like say, I just do like a rotary cable movement, right? I can do that at multiple loads, and the machines that I have I can control concentric load, concentric velocity, eccentric velocities, all this stuff. And then I get average force, average power, peak power, acceleration rates, velocity numbers, all the stuff. So I can put you at multiple loads, kind of a low load, a middle load, and a high load. And, you know, we all have heard of like the force velocity curve, which basically, for people who don't understand what that is, basically just says as load goes up, velocity goes down. And there's a direct relationship between how much you have and how fast you can move it, right? Simple enough. But what we learn is if you start testing people at multiple things, everyone's near the curve, but you'll find under certain lows, you either end below or you're slightly below or slightly above the curve. And where you start seeing the person not on the curve, oh, under a heavy load, you're slower than you should be. Well, maybe you're weak, right? Maybe, right? Or vice versa. If you're super fast, you're on the fast end of the curve, right? Whatever the case may be. And depends on, somebody might be off the curve at the low velocity. Somebody might be off at the high velocity. Somebody be off in the middle velocity, right? You start plotting these curves and you can start seeing where they fall above or below the curve. And now you can adjust their training appropriately, right? But we talk about these things as general concepts, but there are specifics to it, right?
First time I heard about that was about 12 years ago. I think it was, I had heard about it. And then when Rory got hurt, when he hurt his back after he started doing heavy lifting, and of course all the announcers were, you shouldn't do heavy lifting, it's bad. Everybody knows the story. But I had asked some friends of mine who were very good in your field. I said, well, at what point would you determine for a golfer when the load becomes too high and if you're getting in the danger zone? And that's the first time I heard of it. They said you do it. What would you say? I don't never remember that.
Load velocity profile.
Load velocity, yes. And I said, what is it? And they explained it just as you did, that they're able to measure how fast they're moving the object through its range of motion. And then if they get to a certain load and they drop too far on how long it takes them to lift it, okay, we got to bump the weight down because you're going up in load too fast and it's not doing any good.
Yeah, so we have what's called now VBT training, velocity-based training, not just load-based training. Like traditionally, obviously, everything was load-based. You followed BOMPA or whatever. Okay, you're going to do 85% of your 1 RM for, 4 repetitions or whatever, right? Like you had those models, right? You do your 1 RM testing and we'd say, oh, for power, we're in these ranges. For strength, we're in these ranges. For endurance, we're in this. Starting strength, whatever the case may be, right? You had all these different load profiles. But now we can with all the technologies out there, we also know that, hey, to develop power, speed, whatever, for these different exercises, you should be able to move the load that you're using at these velocities. And now, instead of saying, okay, I got to do 100 pounds for 4 reps, whatever, I'm making up numbers, right? Instead of doing 100 pounds for 4 reps, I want to know how fast you can do those 4 reps. And if I'm not hitting the speed I want to hit, then I need to, and the speed is dictated by the goal also. The velocity you need to move something for max strength is going to be very different than max speed. Right? So if I'm doing max speed, I'm, in a lower body exercise, I'm making up numbers again. I might want to be moving at more than a meter per second or faster with the bar. Where if on strength, I might want to be moving at 0.2 meters per second, right? As opposed to saying 90% of my weight or my 1 RM or whatever it is, right? So now I get you exercising and, hey, you're going too slow or you're going too fast or whatever. Okay, take some weight off the bar, or add some weight to the bar, and let's get in the right speed zones. And what's really cool about it at times is it's got what we call an auto-regulation policy, meaning that as opposed to being married to, I did my 1 RM testing, so I got to do 100 pounds, whatever. There's days I didn't sleep as well. I have more fatigue. I have other stuff. So now I come in, I show up the next day, I put 100 pounds on my bar. I'm supposed to be able to break 1 meter per second. Again, back to that example. And all of a sudden I do my reps and I'm hitting 0.9, 0.85, 0.87, 9.2. So guess what? You're fatigued today. Instead of taking the day off, we're just going to bring the load down. We're going to get you to your 1 meter, but instead of doing 100 pounds today, we're going to do 90 pounds, 85 pounds, whatever the number might be. So by nature, like when we talked about earlier about the volume of work, well, my total volume just went down because I brought the load down. So I'm starting to, even though I'm still doing the work to get my velocity and all the work, in a way, I just auto-regulated my volume because I couldn't hit those numbers. But I probably could have lifted at any speed. I could have gotten my 4 reps with that 100. Right? I would have got the weight up.
So it becomes very specialized and specific to the individual, and not just for the individual, but their training session at that particular point in time or in their cycle of in season, off season, preseason, etc. But
Oh yeah.
it's that's pretty interesting, amazing to say the least.
Look, it's a
Technology's
new
gotten
world.
that
Like
far.
just like, we have, everybody's got TrackMan or Foresight and force plates and 3D, and we got 3D on your camera now, sports box, and all of this cool stuff. The gym world is evolving the same. We have tons of awesome new information. We have tons of awesome new technology. Like, but the reality is most trainers don't know how to use any of that.
Well, you know what? One interesting thing, because I've had a lot of very, very good instructors and coaches and trainers and everything, and as it relates to the golf swing, and I want to ask
Mhm.
you if it relates to that technology, the velocity measurement as device
Mhm.
you have as well. And so a lot of the coaches would say that they obviously have developed some serious skill because let's take someone who's 45 plus years old. So they've been teaching or coaching for better part of 20 plus years. So they've developed a very keen eye. But what most of the coaches have said is the utilization of technology. They'll let somebody warm up. They will use the technology to check them in the beginning
Mhm.
to see what's wrong. Then they will remove it. They'll do what they think needs to be done to correct that. And then towards the end of the lesson, after they've had time to work on it, then they'll bring technology back to see if the result was what they wanted to, or if the the change had made the desired improvement.
Yep.
So they're not overutilizing technology. And I think as things trickle down, as we talked about different disciplines, where if you put all the leading people who design these disciplines, a McGill method, a Czech method, a Poliquin, all the different ones, if you put the people at the top of those food chains in the same room and had them talk, I think that they're all speaking different languages, but most would come out of that room in a lot of agreement with what each one of them are saying once they understood it and once it was deciphered. And I think that a lot of coaches are doing something similar, but as it trickles down to other coaches or assistant coaches, and if you go all the way down the list to somebody who's just learning coaching, then they think, well, I've got to use this device all the time, or I have to use this device all the time, and they're not learning the overall skill of coaching. They're learning to become reliant on the technology. So
Yep.
how do you
So a couple
are,
things. I
okay,
think that number one, I think the difference is when you talked about Czech and Poliquin and all that stuff, we focus so much on the differences because that's business.
yeah,
That's not training, right? I think if we really wanted to talk about training, we'd probably talk more about what we have in common versus what we have in different, right? And there's probably pluses and minuses of the different. And probably for one person, Czech's way is better and somebody else's Poliquin's better. The differences. But if you
yes,
looked at the core of it, like I don't know who I did a podcast for somebody recently, and they're like, oh, all there is a squat, a lunge, a push, a pull, this and that stuff. And like people doing all these fancy exercises, and they like showed this exercise of a guy. I go, okay, well, that's just a knee dominant lunge with a rotation. I go, it's still just a knee dominant exercise. I'm like, show me what exercise doesn't fall under a push pull, knee dominant, hip dominant. Those are the only human movements they are. Whether we add complexity to them is different than them not being those things. They are all those things, right? Like there are no human movements that don't fall into those buckets, right? So that's nonsense, right? So I think they're in the training world a little bit different at times, depending on what you're doing, than coaching from a golf perspective, right? So what you're talking about is I look at technology as two ways. One is it can be a report card, meaning, hey, I saw something with your swing. We went and worked on X, Y, and Z. And now we're going to test you and see what the report card said. Did that improve? Did your path move more to the left? Or is your face more square? Or whatever it is that you're looking at, right? Your spin loft, whatever. Doesn't matter, right? So it can be used as a report card, right? And then the other thing is where I think it can be used everything is if you're doing a speed session on the range, then I think it's a motivator. If I turn
mm-hmm.
off, I'm on TrackMan and I turn off every number on that thing but club head speed, and I'm like, hey, we're going to do some speed work. We're going to do 2 balls per minute, and then we're going to take a minute rest. Then we're going to do 2 balls per minute, take a minute rest. And I have a number pop up on there. I promise you, you will swing harder because that number is there. You just will, right? So from that perspective, like in the training world, if you have competitive people, the feedback system of the data is more motivating than me getting in their face saying, let's go, like whatever. You got people who care, and you give them, hey, that was this much force, or this was that, this fast, or this much power, this much watts, whatever. man, it can be the greatest motivator ever. And what's cool about it is I can actually coach technique and not be focused on motivation. Right? One of the things that we do as coaches, we're trying to coach technique and motivate intensity. Right? In golf, you don't have to motivate intensity.
Mm-mm.
You may have to motivate focus, but you're not motivating intensity. In the gym, often, depending on what we're doing, but if we're trying to build strength or speed or power or whatever, you got to coach technique, because when you're doing those things, that's oftentimes when technique breaks down. But you also need to motivate them to go really hard. So I have found that the data becomes the motivator. And I can focus on coaching. And I think that's super valuable.
Yeah, it's very interesting that the subtle difference between the two parts still under the umbrella of the golfer that utilize technology slightly differently to get the outcome that's needed for that discipline.
Yeah, I mean, look, if I'm trying to increase vertical force and and I have some force plate data, I can still use it as a report card. I could go do my squats and my lunges and my whatever I'm going to do, right? And then come back and put you back in the force plate and say, okay, well, what happened when you jumped? I mean, did you jump higher? Did you create the force faster? Is impulse better? Did you, how was your unloading, your deloading versus your acceleration rates and your propulsive components of this or whatever? I can use it that way as well. But some of the stuff in it, I mean, I can tell you 100% because I use it. I mean, not every exercise, obviously, we do because we do dumb, whatever. But I would say half of the stuff that we do with our hockey guys has some measure component with it. And it's incredible how different it is when you have the measure versus not. They're super competitive guys.
Yes, they are.
Right? So, and we have a whiteboard that we put up. And we have certain things we test kind of once every couple weeks. And we have a leaderboard. And the first thing guys do when they walk in the gym is they look at the leaderboard because they're super competitive. And then you put numbers up in their thing. They see how far away they are. How close are they? I'm about to get you. Like, if you don't think that gets you an extra 1 or 2%, then you're crazy, because you are.
It's kind of like the old Dale Carnegie story when the steel mill in Pittsburgh hired him to come in and he, whatever they were making at that plant, and the different shifts would come in, and he watched for, I don't know, I might get this story wrong, as you mentioned. I'm sure is going to comment and tell me how I got it wrong. But just for the point of the story is, whatever product they were making in that division, there were 3 shifts, 3 8-hour shifts a day. And he asked the supervisor, what's the most any shift has made during their time? I think it was 5. So he took a piece of chalk, and right where everybody walks in and walks out, he wrote a gigantic number 5. Let's say it was 15 feet in top to bottom, and let's say it's 7, 8 feet wide. So everyone that walked in saw that. And so of course they asked, what's the 5? What's that on the floor for? And supervisor told him, well, that's the most that any crew has ever done of these parts in one shift. I don't remember the story of how long it took, but I think the maximum they got to was about 20. Just the competitive nature of the human. And I think that's sometimes lost. You guys in your industry, I don't think it is, but I think in my side, the coaching the golf side is sometimes lost. And you don't challenge somebody to just, okay, you can hit 6 out of 18 greens now. Bet you can't. There's no way you can get to 10 or 12. That's a challenge. You're not going to change their swing. You're not going to modify this or that.
Just gamify it.
Yes.
Yeah, look, so I think there's a lot of motivation with the technology, and I think it can be a very powerful tool, and it can help find you gain margins where, it can help you gain margins where you don't think you have margins.
I want to ask you because I was reading it, I was doing some homework on your golf performance mentorship.
Mm-hmm.
That seems to be a really cool and interesting thing, a way to give back. Can you explain that a little bit for someone out there who's really wants to be the next Ben Shear?
Yeah, I don't know if you want that, but so I started in my gym, which I've now sold, so I don't have a location. I'm looking for a location in Jupiter right now so I can restart it, actually. But basically, there's a lot of even the types of things that we're talking about, right? Like, how do you really implement this technology stuff? How do you implement it and correlate your physical evaluation to your force plate and 3D data of their swing, like all of your stuff? Like, how do you do this and make what you're doing right? And obviously we go over research, like, Why do I use a dumbbell versus a kettlebell? Why do I use a barbell versus a kettlebell? Why do I use a flywheel versus a Proteus? Why do I use a 1080 versus a this? Like, what are the pluses and minuses either? Where does each one have its biggest advantages? How do I do it? And so we literally go through a lot of science stuff. I mean, I do stuff on the business side as well. Like, hey, you own your own gym. Like, how do you know what to charge? Like, do you know what it costs you to deliver a session? Most trainers have no idea. Like, they literally couldn't, like, they're like, I don't know. Because most people who go into training are trainers. You know what they know about business? Nothing. Right? They don't really know
how are
very
you going to
much.
buy the toilet paper for the bathroom?
But like, how do you know like what your session costs? Like, how do you come up with a price? Oh, well, the local guy down the street charges $70, so I'm going to charge $70 or $75 or $65. I want to be under, I want to be over, whatever. It's like, well, how many sessions can you do a week? Was that going to cover your bills? How much money do you need to earn? What are your other expenses? Like, how do you actually? So I have some business related stuff. Obviously, lots of it's on training. There's golf stuff in there. Like, hey, what body motions shallow the club? What body motions steepen the club? What body like so we I'm like, look, these are golf terms, but you're going to talk to a golf pro. Oh, he's too steep. He's too this, too that. Well, do you know how they move? Well, do they actually do the things that allow them to do those things well? Is there a different way to shallow the club that maybe they could take from a strategy perspective that either you or the teacher hasn't thought about that they are good at physically, right? And then I teach my whole not my whole evaluation, but I teach a pretty sophisticated evaluation. We get people on force plates, we get people doing all this stuff. We do case study of people, identify all their problems, like that whole thing where I was talking to you earlier in the very beginning about the assessment and how do you find those threads. We go through all of that type of stuff. We teach them about how to read force plate graphs. What does it mean? How do you do it? And then, okay, well, what would you do to actually change that graph from a golf perspective? And then what would you do in the gym to help make those things change on the force plate in their swing, right? So it's a pretty intensive program. We had some great people in there, some really top I had some of the best I would call golf trainers. I mean, other trainers who are training tour players and stuff like that have come and done it. They're looking for the next one, but as of right now, until I find a facility, it's going to be a little bit challenging to do that. I mean, I guess I could probably work out a deal with somebody and run it somewhere, but I prefer to do it on my own. But I think it's just a way where, like I said, I think there's lots of, what I would say? How do you learn how to make the right recipe? How do you take the ingredients and create a recipe? Right. And then part of it is, they get access to me kind of ongoing. Like, I mean, some of them take advantage of it. I mean, there's some people I talk to pretty regularly, call with questions or stuff like that. I build a relationship with these people and I kind of become a little bit of a coach for them on how to create different, we talk about different programs you can run. I give them examples of how I did my juniors programs, different ways I think that are successful models that can work. I caution them over certain things that I did wrong. Like, in my first open my golf part of my gym, I was partnered with one golf professional and I liked him a lot. And we had got a bunch of people together because I think we thought similarly. But what I quickly learned? That all the other golf pros in the area stopped sending me their people because they were afraid that guy was going to take their students.
Yeah, golf pros are weird like that.
Right. So what you learned is like, hey, you know what? You're probably, unless you got a person who you think is going to fill every appointment you want to have in your business, be careful because there are going to be people who don't want any part of that. Right. And that was a hard lesson to learn. I was like, man, I used to have all these guys. Where'd they go? It's like people he gave me a bunch of people, but then it's like all these other people that I would get from all these other pros. Because I had a point where all the pros were sending me their people, right? The local teaching pros. And all of a sudden that kind of dried up. And I was like, wow.
And that's a hard one to learn.
Well, part of, I guess, helping a mentorship is not just teach the good things you learn, but teach them the mistakes you've made as well.
Yeah.
I think is very important. So, just what seemed to be silly things, but life lessons from a business perspective, from a training perspective, from an evaluation perspective, on all the new technology that's coming out. Most people don't really know how to use velocity-based training. Most people don't know how do you do flywheel stuff and all of this other stuff. Like how, why, what's good about it, what's not good about it, what type of person, when do you do what? We do load velocity profiling, how to actually create load velocity profiles and figure out where your people, oh, this person needs more force, this person needs more speed, this person needs more whatever, this person's in the middle, needs a balance of the two. So I teach them all of that kind of stuff.
Got a great program. Highly recommend it to anybody. I'd love to take it, but I can only go through so many continuing ed classes.
Yeah, we actually had a couple golf pros in it who just wanted to learn about the body and how it works and ways to approach changing things and doing things. And the more they learn about the body, I think the better coaches they become.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like the amount of golf teaching certifications I've taken. I mean, I've taken, you name it. I mean, I've probably taken more golf teaching classes than most teachers.
Probably.
Because I think that to help me be the best at my job, I need to understand the golf swing at a high level. Like I can talk golf swing.
Is that one of the differences when you're working with very high level athletes versus even really good athletes, let's say at a collegiate level, that you're understanding of not only the terminology, but the basics of what they're trying to do at their level? It has been a very positive part of your.
Yeah, massively. I mean, look, you could send me TrackMan numbers. I can, I know exactly what you're doing. Like I can look at your 3D data. I can look at your force plate data. I know what, okay. I mean, I've taught in, Mike Adams and Terry Rolls programs. I've taught in these classes. So I've sat in them 10 times. I mean, Scott Cowks. I mean, like you can go down the list of all of these guys who are doing different cool teaching stuff. I mean, I've taken all these classes, I go all those forces and torques with Sasho and Como and like all of the, and Phil Cheatham and like all of these like nerdy golf, things. But I go to all that because I want to understand it better than anybody. I mean, that's what drives me is, to be the best that I can be at what I do. And I think most of us are trying to do that within our lives. I mean, a lot of people would like it and don't want to do the work, but I'm not afraid of doing the work. This is my passion. This is what I do. This is who I am. I enjoy it. I don't look at it as like, oh, I got to go to this thing. I'm like, awesome. I hope I learn something new because I feel like I have a good amount of knowledge, obviously, but there's always things you can learn. And I tell people I look at continuing education. I call it pearl diving. Like, what do you mean pearl diving? I'm like, I'm looking for pearls, right? I'm like, I'm not going to go to, when I was a young kid, you'd go to a class, you go to a Paul Check something, you're like, you learn 50 new things, right? Or whatever. It's like, I'm not going to learn 50 new things from anybody at this point.
No.
But can I learn one or two really cool things or a new way to think about something that I already knew or a new way to coach it or where it should fit in or a nuance of technique or cueing or whatever? Like, just how do I constantly refine my skills and slowly grow my toolbox for whatever I learn? And even the times where I don't feel like I learn anything new, you may get a new perspective of how to talk about it or think about it that makes it easier for the student to understand, the client to understand, which is also valuable. And sometimes just review of stuff you've already known is great. It doesn't hurt to go back. Sometimes like, oh, I used to do that. I learned so much of the other stuff. It's like, I haven't done that in a long time. Let me put that back, into the repertoire because that was actually great stuff.
Yeah, I would have to think at your level when you go to take a certification like that it's a slight adjustment. If you learn a couple things new, it's a slight adjustment that you're making to maybe some of the other things that you have done for a long time. It's like, well, let me see how to implement this, and then it's going to just maybe twist it or torque it or adjust it a degree, and it's going to make it
where does
much
it fit?
more efficient. Yeah,
and where does it fit? Yeah, and again, if I'm looking at volume, well, is this a trade-off? Like, what do I got to give up for this? Right? Because, I always look at it through an elimination process.
Mm-hmm.
It's easy to keep adding, but something has
what do you take out?
Something has to go away.
That's what
Correct, because golfers want to golf. They don't want to spend the majority of their time in the gym.
Well, that's why I urge you to restart your podcast. You got to get some of that info out of your head so you can make room for some new stuff.
Yeah, so that's on my potential list.
Yeah, you got time to wrap up with our emergency 9 questions? Just a fun 9.
Yeah, let it rip.
I could go on for hours and hours, but I know that I've probably taken too much of your time already, and we'll leave the door open to have you on again and do another one. Because a lot of stuff we can
plenty to talk about.
I know you're not a big golfer, but let's say if you got invited to a buddy's member guest and you guys are going to play in whatever flight and you get to the shootout and they're going to crank some music as you step up to the tee for the shootout, what song are you going to have them play?
What song for the shootout? And I'm kind of like an old school hip hop guy, probably something off the Chronic from Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg.
Okay. Let's see. You're your trainer Mount Rushmore.
What's that?
Who would be on your training your trainer list or Mount Rushmore? Who would be on your Mount Rushmore list of trainers? Let me put it that way.
Who do I think are the top guys? How many people are on Mount Rushmore?
Four. You get four.
Four.
That might be a hard one in your industry. Really hard.
Yeah, it's hard. There's a lot of guys. I mean, you know, I obviously don't want to insult anybody. I mean, there are a lot of guys. You know, I look at a guy like a Mike Boyle. I think, you know, what I love about Mike is, you know, I say Mike is the master of the basics. He does, you know, what he does is not overly complex, but what he does perfectly, and he does it amazing. And what I also love about Mike is he's a life learner, and he's not afraid to say, "Oops, you know, I did that. I believe that to be true, and I've learned some new things, and now I got to do it a bit differently." You know, I really have a lot of respect for guys who do that, and kind of, you know, that kind of desire to just constantly get better. I mean, especially, I mean, I'm old, he's older than me. And he's still doing it every single day in the gym, knocking out the hours, doing all that kind of stuff. You know, I think I mentioned him earlier. I think, you know, if you're going to create a Mount Rushmore, you'd have to put a Bondarchuk on there, a guy who can kind of move around and do different things and, you know, manage from that perspective. I think he's obviously one of the greats of our industry of all time. Maybe a little Charlie Francis. Charlie Francis was a track guy. For people who don't know who Charlie was, he was, you know, probably the greatest track sprinting coach / trainer ever, and had his own training models. I think Charlie was pretty good. I mean, it's hard for me to do it. Buddy Morris in the NFL was great. I mean, I think that you can, obviously, we talked about Paul Check, we talked about Charles Poliquin. You know, you can start going down. I mean, and then there's like, you know, kind of more of the research type guys like Verchansky's and some of these other, you know, kind of Russian guys. I mean, people who have read Super Training with Mel Siff is an incredible
that's
book,
a name from way back.
right?
Yeah.
So you can look at Mel Siff and the work that he did, you know, and he kind of went and, like we talked about the Bulgarians and the Russians, like he went over there and like immersed himself in their world and brought back some really cool stuff. I mean, you know, if you're a young trainer, you want to learn about real strength and conditioning, you know, I still think you can go pull out Super Training, the book, and it's going to be hard to find a better book than that as far as like real strength and conditioning goes. So it's hard. There's a lot of amazing people out there. You know, I think some of the functional stuff that people have done, I think for your fascial guys, it's got a lot of this multiplanar stuff, has a lot of value. You look at a Gary Gray, you look at people like that, and kind of how they look at the connected systems of how things work are really cool.
Yeah, I took some of Guy Voyer's classes on that.
So
when he was down with Dan, when Dan had him down in Lauderdale, and that was very interesting.
Awesome. Yeah, look, Guy's unfortunately, sadly, has passed, and you know, was obviously a genius in what he did. I mean, obviously, that was a much more of a therapeutic type of approach. I wouldn't call that like strength and conditioning side of things, but obviously, you started getting into that world. You know, obviously, guys like Guy, guys like Stu, you know, that we've mentioned already. You know, there's lots of these incredible therapeutic guys, you know, Mike Voigt, people like that who do an amazing job with what they're doing and with even different philosophies and doing their stuff, but all very successful in their own right.
Very cool. Let's say Hollywood calls you. Say, we watched your career. We're going to do a movie about you.
Yeah.
And we'll let you pick the actor that plays your role.
I think people would say they'd have to have John Malkovich do it. He kind of looks a little bit like me.
Love Malkovich. KGB Teddy was one of my best all-time characters.
There you go.
Really like that one. All right, that's a great one. Interested to hear your answer on this one. Favorite purchase in the last year under $500?
Favorite purchase in the last year under $500? I don't know if I bought anything under 500. You know, like I think for a lot of people, getting an Oura ring would be, you know, I've had mine for 7 years now, but a lot of people are not doing that stuff.
Early on that.
Yeah. I'm wearing it right now, as we see. I think any of that type of stuff and starting to understand how you're sleeping is probably the most important thing you can do, like how you're resting, how you're recovering for under $500, you know, and Whoop is a good product, but I think Whoop is a little bit better as an activity tracker and maybe not quite as good on the sleep and other data. And I think that Aura is not as good as an activity tracker, but better for looking at your sleep and the recovery information.
Okay, cool. Everyone be sure to check that one out. I know you don't play golf really much, but you've been around it enough. You know it very well. If you could change one rule, what would it be?
One rule for amateurs or for tour players?
Let's say, that's a good bounce back question. Jeez. Let's go with the tour since everybody watches it.
I think with the tour, the biggest issue that we have, I mean, I don't know if it's technically I guess a rule is I would want to see them make the penalties for out of bounds and all that stuff be the same on every single shot. Because I think pace of play, as we all know, is a huge problem. You guys are, oh, this is 2 clubs. This is 1 club. Like, let everything be 1 club, or like pick whatever the one solution is to all this stuff. Let's simplify that stuff. So, not waiting for rules official and where does my drop go? And this is 2 ball clubs. And like, as soon as a guy hits a ball in a bad spot, it's 10-minute delay. It's like, can we simplify how that kind of keeping it moving works?
Yeah, that would be a big help.
And I think that would help the amateurs also, to be honest.
Yes.
Because they don't know it. They don't even know the rules.
They have no idea.
If like everything is 1 club, okay, right? Like, oh, you stubbed the ground, you did this, you hit it out of bounds, or 1 club, 1 club, 1 club. Like, that's it.
Exactly. Out of bounds. Oh, just drop it 1 club from where it went out of bounds.
That's it. Let's go. Move along. Hit the ball.
Most used app on your phone.
Most used app on my phone. I guess I would say my messaging messenger, because I do a lot, because I'm not always on the road with my guys. And I mean, I've had multiple texts come in while we're sitting here doing this right now from players, but it is communication with my guys when I'm not with them. Right. And some of these guys are in Jupiter where I live in the year and I get to see them a lot, but somebody else might be doing something else. I have guys who live in the Bahamas and other places, and, trying to stay on top of things day to day and kind of almost at times hour to hour with them. So, kind of being available when you're not available.
Yeah. Let's see. If you could sit in a golf cart, talk to anybody you wanted to, who would it be?
About golf?
About anything.
I can sit in a golf cart and talk to anyone about anyone. As crazy as I'd say, I'd want to just sit with my son.
No one's going to.
21 years old, and we're getting to an age where he's moving up and on in life and all that stuff. And, you get to this age where it's like, oh, really? He's not going to be home anymore in the summers. He's not going to be doing this. He's not going to be doing that. And my desire to keep that relationship close and tight is my number 1 priority in life.
That's a cool one. I like that one. In your opinion, what's worse? This is a new one, so this is kind of a really fun one. What's worse, iron covers or a overly well done steak?
Oof, both are pretty bad. For me personally, yes. An overly done steak.
Okay. That one's been very popular so far. It's a new one, but we've had a lot of success and fun with that one. Just a couple more. If you could put any chain, food chain or restaurant chain, whatever you want, in your kitchen, who's it going to be?
I'm not a big food chain guy.
As much as you're on the road, I figure you got to have a.
Unfortunately, I do. But I mean, am I going to put any food chain? I mean, I don't know. Capital Grill.
Okay, that's a pretty good one.
I'm not going for Chipotle or something, if that's what you're looking for.
That's actually been probably the number 1 answer on that one.
Yeah, that's the easiest. But look, if I got one spot, I mean, the Capital Grill, I can get a nice lobster. I can get a nice, beautiful steak. I mean,
I'm in line with you. I'm not a Chipotle's great if you're on the road and you just need something quick. But if you want something that's really good,
come on. If I got one, I'm going to step it up. I mean, you can make a Ruth Chris if you want, whatever. Mm-hmm. One of those Flemings, pick one of those type of places. I'll be fine with any of that.
And then the last one, in your opinion, especially anybody over 50, it's been in the golf world for some time. I'm curious on this one as well. Your opinion as far as golfers are concerned, who would be the GOAT?
I think Jack, you can't, until somebody has more majors than Jack, he's the GOAT. But I would say Tiger was the greatest player for a period of time that's ever played the game.
I'm in that camp. But again, I'll be 52 in a month. It seems like
I'm 55. So.
Yeah, the cutoff line's about 45. Anybody over 45, Jack has the edge. Anybody 45 and under, Tiger has a bigger edge. So I think Tiger
But that's just
overall,
because people under 45 didn't see Jack.
right?
They saw Tiger. So it's like, again, you ask people today who's the best basketball player, people are going to say LeBron.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you ask people over 45, they're going to say MJ.
Yep.
Right. So what I would argue is for us old guys, we saw both. Our opinion counts more.
Someone wants to reach out to you. They want to come see you. They want to hire you to come do a talk. They want to, whatever they want to get a hold of you. What's the best way to do it?
You can email me at ben@bensheargolf.com. Shear is SHEAR. You can find me on Instagram. I don't even know what my Instagram is. I think it's ben.shear, maybe.
And I'll have all your social media.
Yeah, all my social media. Hit me up through Messenger. But if you want to get to me directly, you can email me. Like I said, at ben@bensheargolf.com is always easy.
And as always, we'll have all of Ben's links to his website, all his social media stuff, one click in the summary. Ben, it's been great. I wish we had more time. It's been long time of following you and watching you, and finally reached out. My fault that it's taken so long. But again, there were a lot of Dr. Scott Lynn was another one that was on the show that said I need to reach out to you. Dr. Will Wu, Dunnigan. I think Calx told me to, and so we hear your name enough, and eventually I would reach out. So
well, I appreciate you reaching out. I'm happy to help out. It's we all have a passion for this same game, and how we help players enjoy the game more, play better, feel better, all of those important things. And I think the guys that you listed are people with passion for this. They're not just guys doing it as a job, and I'd like to include myself in that group. And I think that's what makes those of us, have had some success where we are, is that the actual desire and passion for the game, not the passion for the business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's no secret to success or no shortcuts. The number one thing you gotta have is the passion for what you're doing, and not keeping your eye on the goal of success and of achievement, and not just success of financial. I think is
I mean, with my tour players, it's their success, it's not mine.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Thank you. And just hang out a minute. And thanks, everybody. We'll catch you next time.